Thank you all so much for tuning in today. First office hours of the year. So excited to be here and for us to all learn about going alcohol-free as an ambitious woman. So a core goal of Dreamers and Doers is amplifying you and your journeys, and intimate educational sessions like today's, filled with insights thanks to your fellow members, are the perfect opportunity for us to all up-level together. So before we officially begin, I want to share a bit of background information on our esteemed expert. Kay has been Juicy AF, alcohol-free since 1999. She is a successful entrepreneur, author. Her book is coming out on Tuesday. So exciting. I'm sure she'll mention it. And the leader of an alcohol-free community. She helps women transform their lives by stopping the drinking spiral and creating a rich, rewarding, joyful future. So with that, I will hand it over to you, Kay. We are so excited to learn from your expertise today. We know how valuable your time is, and we are so grateful to you for investing in the collective in this way.
Oh, that's so sweet. Thank you so much. So I'm going to share my screen and hold before I do. Great. So did this come up? Please tell me the technology is in fact working. Yay, yes. Love that.
Yes. Beautiful.
Okay, so what I have found is that going alcohol-free really has been the ultimate career hack for me as an ambitious woman. And so let me tell you a little bit about how that works. Before I gave up alcohol, I was in this kind of endless cycle that was on repeat for years. I would wake up anxious, a little bit hungover, a little bit bleary. I'd work out, I'd try to sweat it out. I would pretend hard, really, really hard all day. I had a serious case of imposter syndrome. And so I didn't want anybody to find out, how I felt. And be super ambitious and overachieving and have all this anxiety that I had built up during the day. And of course, a glass of wine seemed like a great way to take the edge off. So I'd start with a sip or a glass, and more times than not, that parlayed into a bottle or more. And then I woke up the next morning with anxiety. So I was anxious. So I, just rinse and repeat, rinse and repeat, rinse and repeat. And, I started making up all kinds of rules for myself about, I'm only going to drink clear liquor. I'm not going to drink the brown stuff. I'm only going to drink wine. I'm never going to drink beer. I'm going to have a glass of water between each glass of wine. And nothing really worked. And the reason why that I understand now is the way my body reacts to alcohol is once I start, I can't stop. Not always, but enough of the time, right? And once I stop and say, I'm never doing that again, I always start. And so it's this spiral of I start and I can't stop. And then I say never again. And then I always have, I'll just have one. And then the race is on again. So that's what it was like before. I had this meteoric start to my career, and it really had stalled out. So after I went free from alcohol, I increased my income 600%. I've started $4 million plus companies. I've helped Fortune 200 companies create their next $100 million platforms. I've written 2 books. I met and married the love of my life, still crazy about him 20 years later. I moved to Boulder, Colorado, which is my dream hometown. I've traveled the world, and where I really thought that alcohol was my conduit to a world of color and magic and possibilities, I've found a way to create that in my real life so I didn't need the alcohol to get there. One of the big news flashes for me is that alcohol actually creates anxiety. In our culture, we believe that it's a great way to take the edge off, to relax. You can kind of feel that feeling of, when you have that first sip. But what happens over time is it ratchets up that anxiety. And there are three biological mechanisms that produce that effect. The first is even a glass of wine many hours before you go to sleep disrupts your sleep. And disrupted sleep results in an increase in cortisol, which is the stress hormone. So that creates anxiety. Number two, alcohol kills bacteria. We know that, right? That's the way we sanitize medical instruments and whatnot. But we also know that we have bacteria in our guts, and there is a gut-brain connection. So when we kill the bacteria in our gut by drinking, it actually affects our mental chemistry, our brain chemistry. Number two way of creating anxiety. And the third way I find so fascinating, even drinking 7 drinks a week on a regular basis affects our homeostasis, right? So homeostasis is that biological mechanism that keeps our physical bodies safe enough to survive. It's why we shiver when we're cold and we sweat when we're hot. What happens when we drink regularly is that our bodies come to expect that depressant, that relaxant is going to be coming online. And so to make sure that you don't get so relaxed that you forget to breathe or your heart forgets to beat, the baseline ratchets up to more anxious to offset the expected relaxant of the alcohol if you drink on a regular basis. So 7 drinks a week, that could be 1 glass of wine a night. It could be 3 drinks on Friday, 4 on Saturday. I mean, it can be arranged in any specific pattern. It's the regularity of it that actually creates anxiety. So I think it's so important to communicate this because it's the opposite of what many of us actually believe. So I thought that perhaps in this conversation, what might be the most helpful would be for me to talk about 5 things I learned from being alcohol free that helped me close 85% of all the deals that I pitched, all the clients that I've pitched. So I'll talk a little bit about what I learned and why it's important to being alcohol free. I haven't had a drink for 23 and a half years, right? So it's a long time. And then I'll talk about how I've applied that lesson to my professional life. And it really has been my competitive edge. So the first is how important it is to set context with radical honesty. What I learned is pretending is not the way. That being really honest about who I am, how I'm feeling, what I'm thinking is so ridiculously freeing. Early in my alcohol-free experience, I went to a recovery meeting and there was this woman at the front who was telling her story. And I knew her professionally. She was super successful and beautiful, wearing designer clothes, well put together, articulate, riveting. And she told this story that started off pretty normal. She was talking about, she was in her living room with her husband. Then it started to get weird. She was also there with her boyfriend and the police, and it was 3 a.m. And she said, and I thought this was perfectly normal. And she threw back this mane of auburn curls and she laughed. And I remember being viscerally shocked because at the time, everything I was doing was hidden under these layers of shame and remorse and regret and embarrassment and a wallpaper on top of that saying nothing to see here, pass on by. And this woman was not only free of alcohol, but she was also free of shame. And she was free of pretense. And all that was left was this sparkling sense of aliveness. And I wanted that. And today I want to be that for other women that are considering whether or not alcohol is working for them. What I've learned in the process of being alcohol free is that the secrets that I kept were running me. My shame about my drinking and oh my God, I was such a train wreck. The things, the men I was going home with and the fights I was picking and the places I was going, all of that, because I was hiding it, ran me, totally ran me. It's Jung who says that it's these unconscious beliefs and these secrets we keep that run us, and we call it fate. And what I've learned is that people read your vibe. People know if you're being authentic, if you're being honest, or if you're hiding something. They may not know exactly what it is you're hiding, but they definitely know that something's off. So this freedom that I got from being radically honest about how much I'd been drinking, what I'd been doing when I was drinking, and why I was drinking, I brought that into the business context. And what I found is that setting context in every conversation with a client or with a prospective client sets the stage for the emotion and the tenor of the conversation that flows after. Think about setting context as creating the corral around the mood of a conversation or an interaction. So if I set context or I come into a conversation angry, full of blame, pissed off about something, what's going to happen in that corral, that emotional corral, is going to only allow certain actions to happen. Whereas if I come in with some humility, forgiveness, and a sense of amusement, there's a whole different set of actions that are available. If I were pissed off at one of my kids, I wouldn't be making their favorite dinner for them, right? Like the emotional field, the mood that gets set determines what actions are possible. So that emotional context setting at the beginning of a conversation actually is more important than what you write on your slides or what you write in your proposal. The way that I've learned to set context is to make 3 to 5 short declarative sentences. This is why this conversation matters to me. This is how I'm feeling. And this is my concern and my hope for you. So in other words, why this matters to me. I'm so on fire about what I've learned and I want to share it, how I'm feeling, kind of terrified and kind of excited. I'm not sure which, but I've got a ton of energy. And my concern and my hope for you in this presentation is that there is something that sows a seed that turns out to be useful to you in your lives. The second thing I learned is to make the Copernican shift. You guys remember Copernicus? He was the dude who said, no, Ptolemy is wrong. It's not the sun that's revolving around the earth. It's actually the earth that's revolving around the sun. What I learned when I came into my alcohol-free world was I am not the center of the universe, and not everybody is paying attention to me and criticizing me and finding fault with me. If I put something else in the center of my perceptual universe, I get relief from my self-centered fear, my concern that I'm not good enough, or that I'm making a mistake, or that I'm not worthy. When I put nature in the center, when I put divine source or God or Allah or whatever you call that mystery that keeps us all here if I put a friend in the center of my universe, it really brings me so much relief. The way this shows up for me very practically is at the beginning of being alcohol free, I was so concerned about going to parties and what I was going to say when somebody asked me why I wasn't drinking. For the record, that's happened to me maybe 5 times in 23 years, like kind of a rude, pushy question. But what I found was, instead of being self-conscious about what I wasn't doing, if I put my focus on being helpful to the host or the other party guests, it took my self-consciousness away. I have washed more dishes since going alcohol free than I think I did in all the years put together before that. And largely because it's a way of always being able to be of service. There are always dishes that need to be washed, whether I was meeting my mother-in-law for the first time or at a party where I didn't know anybody. There are always dishes to be washed. How did I apply this in my business life? I got really, really curious about standing in my clients' shoes. Right now, you guys can look at me through your computer screen and you can see, the stuff on the shelves behind me. But if I could get you to come and stand in my shoes for just a second, you would see this beautiful ponderosa pine forest. And sometimes I have foxes and turkeys and sometimes even a bear trotting past my window. You would be able to see the world from my point of view, not just your point of view. And I really learned to do that with my clients. I didn't presume that I knew what was animating them to ask me for a proposal. I got super curious about their own experience and the context for it. I put my emphasis less on me selling you what I've got to sell you and more on, let me understand your world so I can see places in which I might be able to be helpful. The third thing I learned is that we connect through our stories. Our stories about ourselves are what create our experiences. I truly believe that the beliefs we choose or we fall into when we're little people shape the way the world kind of collects and coagulates around us. And then we see those beliefs played back to us and we say, see, I knew I wasn't good enough. The world just told me I wasn't good enough. If you go through the world with a chip on your shoulder, or you put everybody else first, or you believe that you're not worthy of setting boundaries, the world is going to behave in those ways towards you. There's always a different interpretation. One of the things that I really value in being alcohol free was, number one, having a guidebook, and number two, having some friends on the same journey as I, so that when I have a tough situation, they can say to me, you're totally making that up in your head. That is not at all what's happening here. And in the same way, I've been able to do that with clients. I would always draw out their story. And I call this plot mountain. It's something that they now teach to kids in school. I did not learn this in school. I had to learn this outside of school. But plot mountain, you always start in a certain place. You take a path with lots of trouble. You reach some kind of resolution, and then there's a denouement or a happily ever after, right? Like Cinderella. She's the scullion maid. There's what precipitates the action. There's an invitation to the ball. All of this crap happens. She finally meets the prince and they fall in love, and boom, they live happily ever after. And she becomes the founder of a shoe emporium. Like, that is the way the story goes. And I would use questions to draw that narrative arc, that plot mountain, out of my potential clients. I would always start with asking, why now? Why is this an issue now? There is a precipitating event always a precipitating event. What was it? What happened? And then I wanted to know, what was the mountain peak? What would be the tangible evidence that the result of our work together exceeded your expectation? And then that happily ever after, that denouement, what then would be possible? What would the moral of that story be? Then I go back to the precipitating event. What's at risk here? If you don't fix this or come up with a new solution, what's at risk for the company, for the brand, for the team? What about for you personally? What's at risk? And then what else have you tried? And what did you learn from those things? Do you have the resources you need within your company? What's missing? Why are those things important to you? And then the same way, my friends will question the way I'm interpreting what's going on. I'll say, are you open to another perspective or interpretation? Then I'm able to make the pitch into what's really going on and what's really driving their decisions, rather than what they called and asked for. And my close rate went from 30% to 85% once I started using the series of questions. I think it's also because even these questions got them to think about what they really needed and why they really needed it. So just the conversation added so much value. The fourth thing I learned is that forgiveness frees us. We might think we're letting the other guy off the hook, but truly we are letting ourselves off the hook. Blaming other people keeps us hooked. There's a beautiful translation of what's the Lord's Prayer from the original Aramaic. And one of the line that I love the most in it is, it talks about disentangling ourselves from the threads that entangle our destiny with others. And isn't that what we want? I don't want the person who's harmed me to control my inner environment. What I found was being immersed in my resentment or my blame of somebody else, A, didn't change anything, and B, it made me unhappy. It didn't seem to affect them at all, but it made me really unhappy. How I applied this was, not every client relationship is fabulous. I always took a look back at, how did I contribute? Did I ignore, a sea of red flags? Did I not set boundaries? Did I allow scope creep? Did I agree to do something that I knew wasn't gonna work out very well? Like, what was my part? And admitting that and trying to make things as right as I possibly could. And then sending the other person blessings, loving kindness, asking for them to be whole and happy and prosperous and fulfilled. Those practices allowed me in my personal life to be at peace with my ex-husband and my mother and my daughters, at least most of the time, and also in my client relationships. It more likely than not was able to let those troubling relationships resolve in a way where we could work together again, or they would still refer me. And then the fifth is that the wound is the way. Here's what I learned. Alcohol is the conduit away from pain, and it is the conduit towards what's missing. The pain was those old stories that I was referring to before, all those old stories that ran me. When I was able to identify this pervading belief that I had that I was not worthy of being noticed and that somehow I was always not enough, just being able to identify that gave me so much relief, so much clarity. And then what I learned was to substitute a spiritual principle like compassion and honesty, gratitude, forgiveness, amusement, my favorite spiritual principle, amusement, um, humility. When I'm able to substitute a spiritual principle for these old stories of inadequacy and unworthiness, it gives me a roadmap. It's kind of like the spiritual equivalent of the eat this, not that diet, you know? So instead of taking everything as being more evidence for my inadequacy, if I'm able to have a modicum of amusement, a little bit of compassion for myself, and rigorous honesty for what's really going on with me, it allows me to walk through that circle of fear that we all have that keeps us playing too small. How did I apply this? Well, it's totally transformed the way I show up, but it's transformed my relationship with things that don't go well. Do you guys know the old story about the little girl who was given a big pile of manure for her birthday? She grabbed a shovel and started to dig. Why? Well, because with all the shit around here, there's sure to be a pony somewhere. And that's really what I have learned, is that that big pile of shit, there is always gold or a pony in there somewhere. So when things don't go well, to me, it's the best news, because that's where the gold is. That's where the wisdom is. That's where the freedom is. And I get in there and I start digging. Like, how was I complicit in creating this problem? What did I do? What was my attitude? What red flags did I ignore? What boundary did I not pay attention to? And I'll rewind the tape and say, if I could rerun this, let's imagine 10 to 12 to 20 different things that I could have done instead. And then I'll say, you know what? The one that gives me the most joy and relief is this one. I'm going to experiment with that the next time I'm in this type of difficult situation. You know, the good news is God in her infinite wisdom always gives us another chance to learn the lesson. And I think it comes around and comes around and comes around until we learn to let go and surrender to the moment. So that is what I wanted to share with you today. What I wanted to invite you to is to get advance access to my new book, Juicy AF, Alcohol Free, Stop the Drinking Spiral, Create Your Future. If you take advantage of the this advance access, you'll get $550 worth of bonuses, including a 58-page workbook that you can't get anywhere else, this adorable bright red journal, it's fabulous, and also a 30-minute anxiety and energy audit with me. I put two links there. One is the link to the advanced access to the book. And the second one is if you want to have a 30-minute call to see how some of these ideas could apply to you and your business opportunities, it would be such a privilege for me to have the opportunity to have that conversation with you. So thank you all so much.
Thank you. Excuse me. Thank you so much. This was amazing. I totally had goosebumps when you are talking about your journey, and it's just so inspiring to see what is possible when we kind of like shift these societal norms that have kind of been thrust upon us. So thank you so much for your vulnerability and authenticity. We're so grateful for you. And thank you for these special offers that you shared with us today. Those are amazing. If anyone has any questions, feel free to drop them in the chat or unmute yourself and we can dive in there. Thank you for the link. Okay.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I'd love just a teeny bit of feedback since I'm so new at doing this. What resonated with you? What landed with you? Is this what you were expecting you signed up for?
No, I thought it was wonderful. I mean, I think, I really like the part about like having hard skills to sort of figure out what you're going to do instead. That's been something because, my journey is I didn't drink for all of the pandemic. I sort of saw the writing on the wall and was like, okay, you're going to slippy slide into that wine. A glass of wine turns into a bottle of wine real fucking quick. And then after the pandemic passed, I was like, okay, I've been sort of I'm like, okay, when I want to have the opportunity to be able to socially drink. And I'm sort of coming back to, I don't want to drink at all. And the hardest thing for me and what spoke to me about your presentation is finding alternatives, especially around things like, as we talked at the beginning of this, New Orleans is like, I don't know, I've been to other places and lived in other cities. And one thing about New Orleans is that it is very centered around alcohol. Like there is a lot of alcohol. A lot of alcoholics. My mom is one. And a lot of alcoholism, active alcoholism, but really no sort of talk around it or like, I don't know. I'll even say New Year's Eve, I went alcohol free. It was kind of like, I just don't feel like feeling like shit the next day.
Yep.
So I didn't drink at all. And even my friends who are lovely and who are not trying to pressure me to drink were like, of course it's everyone has a bottle of liquor. We're all walking in the street because you can drink on the street. So you're drinking on the street with your bottle of liquor and they're like, oh, take a shot. What's wrong? Like, what's going on? Is everything okay? And it's like, I don't know. I think that's the hardest piece for me is having something ready that isn't, because I don't, like I said, I don't think I'm an alcoholic. I've seen others and I grew up with one, but I have enough fear around alcoholism that I've stayed away. So you can't say like, well, I'm an alcoholic. But you have to have some sort of, preparing
you have to have a script. Yeah. You gotta have a script. Yeah, I like that. Yeah. In the book, I have some sample scripts for 7 sticky situations.
Okay.
Because
that's awesome. That's
you gotta have it.
Yeah. Like emotionally for yourself as well to be like prepared for it, because that's when I would cave like most often when I would, I mean, during the pandemic, I'm pretty stubborn. So like I did manage to not drink because I was like, well, I'm not gonna, but coming back into it and like finding a balance and now sort of leaning towards no alcohol. That's the hardest part for me is like coming into a situation and being like, especially here in New Orleans where like, what do you do instead of happy hour in New Orleans? Like, where do you go if you're not drinking? So, oh, look, is that the love of your life behind you scooting through? Yeah, I love it. But yeah, I mean, I really appreciate that you included that because at least that's my feedback. And what struck me the most is like that you thought about that. Obviously with 20 odd years of sobriety, I'm sure you have thought about that many times. What the hell am I going to say?
Oh my God, that was my biggest fear. It was my biggest fear. What was I going to say when somebody asked me why I wasn't drinking? Number one. And number two, what in the hell was I going to do with myself?
Yeah.
Right? How was I going to socialize without drinking? Because that was alcohol was my conduit to connecting with other people. And I have had to create other ways of connecting with people. And I have an exercise I think it's in the workbook that's called the Joy Finder, right? Because how are you going to find joy? How are you going to find connection if you're not going to happy hour and you're not getting blasted with people?
Yeah.
And so what I've tried to do is not only give kind of a philosophical, spiritual, here's what's going to get at the stuff that's way underneath that, but also some super tangible, practical, here's how to get through the first, year before you're in a new groove and have friends that want to go for hikes and want to, meet for coffee. And
what's crazy is something that I'm sorry if I missed this, if you mentioned it, but something that like was really profound to me is that this is something that's happening to a lot of women. A lot of women are coming to this realization. And I especially resonated with the comments because the hardest for me are how misogynistic and male-centered, like typical alcohol treatment programs are.
They are.
Because like the whole thing is like, make yourself small in front of the great God. And it's like, my problem isn't that I'm too small. My problem is that I've been too fucking small for a long time. And I'm dealing with the pain of that through alcohol.
Sophie, that is why I've created Juicy, because being told that I needed to puncture my ego was like,
no, that's not the problem. My
seriously,
ego was punctured.
my ego is in the, is subterranean.
Yeah.
No, like I get that that's how men, at least men in the 30s when AA was created, I get how that is how they present dead. That is not my issue.
Right.
And
no, exactly.
That is why it's interesting hearing you say that, because that is the thesis of Juicy. Completely the thesis of Juicy. There are other programs that are in existence today that are women led, but they aren't for women exclusively, and they don't contain the spiritual component.
Yeah.
When I talk about spiritual, I'm not talking about the white guy in the sky. I'm talking about spiritual laws that we all know, like forgiveness frees you. Like substitute a spiritual principle for these old self-centered stories. You know what I mean? It's like, there are these laws that work. Let's just work with them. You can believe or not believe anything, but these laws are going to affect you whether you are conscious of them or aren't. And so that's kind of my sweet spot. It's like, well, it's women only. It's women only. I don't want men in there. It's spiritual, like AA, but not God. And it's not about ego deflation, man. We don't need that. We don't need any more of being told we're not good enough.
That was a problem in the first place.
That is our problem.
That message, and then we reiterated that message and internalized it for, I don't know, for me, 40 years or so.
Well, and I think for millennia, for a lot of women, right? So,
No, and I'm glad that you addressed that, because like I said, as someone who I saw my mother go through it, and I was like, this was not why you're drinking. Like, it's not because you think you're so important and you want to party. It's like, you have some serious trauma lying under this that you quieted and hid. And I really like that was part of your messaging too, or part of your story. And what you talked about today is letting go of that shame and really, like, being honest and finding that freedom there, because it's like, I know that was the question when I stopped during the pandemic. I was like, why am I drinking? I'm like, oh, I mean, trauma, lots of trauma.
It is.
But also, like, my everyday life was extremely, like, I'm an immigration attorney who works with, like, recent immigrants. So it's just like every day was some new horror story, and just feeling completely unable to change something. Yeah. And like really reflecting on that and being like, this is coming not from a place where you're like drinking to have fun or drinking to like participate in whatever. You're drinking because you just want to shut your brain off, and you just want to stop thinking about those things instead of, I don't know, thinking about them and going to therapy, and and alcohol, like you said, gets in the way of that healing. So I'm glad you have had this journey, and I'm grateful to you for sharing with us today. Like, it definitely was very interesting and very, very cool. Like, very great to talk and see more women who are kicking ass sober, I love that.
Thanks. Thank you for the feedback. Hi, Masasha.
Hi. My kids are in the other room right now. Sorry, the bomb cyclone is hitting the Bay Area very soon. So they're closing schools in the area for today and tomorrow. But thank you so much. So much of what you said, I thought was really great. I in particular loved how you sort of tied some of your journey into what you took and put in front of your clients too, because that really resonated with me. I do racial justice work now. I'm also an attorney. So, I didn't really have a relationship with alcohol until I left college and worked in finance in Tokyo, which was big time drinking all the time. And then we went to law school, which, Sophie, you probably know this as well. Every party has an alcohol component. And it doesn't stop once you leave law school either. So I think that to think about removing alcohol from the practice or how you serve your clients, or now in the racial justice work that I do, is such a really intriguing way to present that. So I really appreciated that, and thought that that was something different than I've heard or seen in other platforms. So I thought that was great. And I also loved the discussion that you were just having with Sophie about misogyny, and, you know, the power of women. That's a lot of the work that I do as well, sort of the inherent undervaluing of women in our society. And so I think that that's so important as a focus. So for me, I have two kids who are 8 and 10, and there's a lot of focus sort of on drinking as a parental, like a, you know, mom's
mommy
thing.
wine culture.
Yes, mommy juice. And especially when I was homeschooling kids during the pandemic, there was a lot of that. And I have 2 boys who play competitive sports, so there's a lot of drinking on the side. Right. So for me, especially now that I'm going to be, 46 in a couple of weeks, I think that how I view alcohol in my life, how I want it to be in my life or not, has been something I've been thinking about a lot. So I was so excited to see that this was the topic of the office hours. So I really, really appreciated what you shared. It really resonated with me.
Well, you two are both kind of my ideal people to work with, truly are. So it would be great to continue the conversation. If you're up for it, just, you know where to find me now. The thing is, the other thing I would just submit to you is you can do a trial, you can do an experiment. You can experiment with being alcohol-free for 30 days or 60 or 90 days and just see how it feels. It doesn't have to be this, oh my God, I'm getting sober forever. It can be I'm going to experiment and see what happens, see if it works for me, see what I learn, and then make a more informed decision. Because I know when I was where you are, I could not imagine a life without alcohol. And what I found very quickly was it was actually easier to be alcohol-free for me than to be constantly in the should I, shouldn't I, how am I going to handle this? Is this the exception? That was exhausting. To just take a break and be clean about it, be 100% committed for a manageable amount of time, was actually easier for me than being in that in-between place. That was really uncomfortable. So I get it. I've been there.
I absolutely love this conversation. So it's been so amazing. I know you both shared great feedback verbally. If you wanted to share any feedback in our official events form, we'd love to hear it. And if you have any other ideas for events, that would be amazing as well. But thank you all for showing up today and adding to this conversation. Thank you, Kay, for driving the conversation and for the really, really important work that you're doing. It was such a treat to learn from you, and I'm really excited for your book to come out on Tuesday.
Thanks. Oh, I have one request. Would you guys, okay, so it's going to be 99 cents on Tuesday. Would you please buy a copy of my book on Tuesday next week, the 10th? 99 cents. You'll get all kinds of fun bonuses.
Amazing. Well, this was wonderful. Definitely the best way to kick off the new year. I can't think of a more perfect topic to start 2023 off with. Thank you all for being here today. And
this was great.
Yeah, this was so great. And hopefully we'll see you all on the next office hours.
Thank you, Hannah. Thanks, Masasha. Thanks, Sophie.
Have a great day,
Take care.
everyone.
Bye.
Thank you too. Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye.